Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Matthew Yourkvitch. I'm an attorney at Yourkvitch and Debo, and I'll talk to you a little bit today about the use of Ohio Revised Code 3767.41, which is nuisance abatement. Some people will refer to it as receivership. I always correct them. You know, the action is a nuisance abatement action. Receivership is a potential remedy for that action. I have been filing public nuisance actions under 3767.41 since about 2007, 2008, primarily for nonprofit neighborhood development corporations, anybody from Slavic Village to Detroit Shoreway to Ohio City to Famicos to Fairfax. I consider this action, kind of a path of last resort. When we can't deal with problem properties, any other of the easier methods, criminal code enforcement, tax foreclosure, just let the market address properties. For those really difficult vacant and abandoned properties where you really can't, if it's an out-of-state LLC that you can't, get control of or get to participate in criminal court hearings. If someone is deceased and the family has decided not to probate the estate, and so the property just languishes for a period of time, this action is really powerful to address those, drastic properties. And so that's a little bit about me. Like I said, I started out working for the law school and filing these actions on behalf of neighborhood CDCs. Also was responsible for bringing the action on behalf of Neighborhood Progress against both Deutsche Bank and Wells Fargo. That action resulted in a large volume of properties being transferred to the Cuyahoga County Land Bank and implementing some of the policies where banks actually would distribute property to the land bank instead of investors, for $100 a piece. I also, was a law fellow for Judge Pianka for a year or so, and was appointed to represent people that had really problem title that wouldn't allow them to address the condition of that property because of the condition of their title. So this action, like I said, is a state statute under Ohio Revised Code 3767.41. It provides for essentially a neighbor within 500 feet, a nonprofit community development corporation, or a municipality to bring a civil action to force the owner to abate a public nuisance. So the first stage of the action is for the court to declare a property a nuisance. And so what is a nuisance? It's defined here under the statute. It's a building that's a menace to the public health, welfare, safety. It's a building that's structurally unsafe, unsanitary, or not provided with, safe ingress or egress, constitute a fire hazard, dangerous to human life, otherwise no longer fit or habitable, or in relation to its existing use constitutes a hazard to the public health, welfare, safety by reason of inadequate maintenance, dilapidation, obsolescence, or abandonment. And what does that mean? Well, to me, people ask me this question a lot. It's not a house with chipped paint, right? It is a property that has extensive code violations, both exterior code violations and interior code violations. But it's not just that. I always say the first response is it's not just chipped and peeling paint. It really is it's a building that should be condemned or could be condemned if the city were, able to condemn it, or, the city were, functioning properly. It's a building that has, extensive code violations that aren't being addressed through the criminal code process. Anybody that's familiar with our housing court knows that, they do great work, but they also have a list of, I don't know if it's 3,000 capious companies that have warrants out for their arrest because they refuse to show up to criminal code violation court. And those properties aren't addressed in the criminal manner because we can't hold those owners accountable. This action is civil, so it gives you a little bit more power to bring the property under the control of the court. And so the simplest way to understand this is for a really drastic property, we can bring the owner to court, even if the owner doesn't show up, and say, court, we want you to declare this property a public nuisance. And once the court declares the property a public nuisance, the court then gives the owner or any other interested party, such as a mortgage holder, lien holder, the municipality, gives any interested party the opportunity to abate that nuisance. If the owner or any of the interested parties, like for instance, a mortgage holder or bank, either refuses or has no means to abate the nuisance themselves, then the court has the authority under this statute to appoint a receiver. And what a receiver is an agent of the court that can take action on behalf of the court to do certain things. The receiver's given certain authority under the statute, essentially to take control of the property. It could be as simple as boarding up and securing the property. It could be as simple as mowing the grass. It could be as simple as we've done it before. If we needed to get the gas turned on in the winter, the Sylvia building in Detroit Shoreway had an owner that died, and the property was held in an LLC, and there were 3 elderly tenants in the building in the winter, and there was a gas leak, and so the gas company shut the power off. Well, there was no appropriate party that could direct the gas company to turn the gas on, that could pay for the repairs to the gas line, and that could restore the heat to these elderly tenants during the winter. And so we went in under 3767.41, had the property declared a nuisance, and appointed a receiver to essentially fix the gas line, restore heat to the tenants, and eventually the building was became fully rehabbed. So it can be very powerful when there's no one else to get to take action on a property. This code section can do that. The other question I get asked a lot is, what does it mean to abate a nuisance? If we simply board up the property, is that good enough? And the statute is very clear that merely boarding up the property does not abate the nuisance. And what I explain to people is, it's returning the property, it's addressing all the code violations for certain, bringing the property back up to code, and it allows you to bring the property back up to its beneficial, useful life for the remainder, right? So if you see this, property needs a new roof, you can put a new roof on. If it needs new siding or exterior repairs or new windows, you can put new windows in it. Because all of those things would bring the property, back up to, living conditions for its remaining useful life. And so you'll see there, abatement does not mean merely boarding up a building found to be a public nuisance. Okay. I mentioned it can be commenced. These actions, the people that have standing to bring these actions are a municipal corporation, a neighbor within 500 feet, a tenant of the building, or a nonprofit corporation that has one of its goals to improve the housing conditions in the county or municipal corporation in which the building is located. That's 99% of the time that I've brought these actions, they've been on behalf of nonprofit neighborhood development corporations. I've also brought them on behalf of neighbors a few times, but it really has to be a neighbor that has the capacity to abate the nuisance, which is sometimes tricky. And then municipalities can bring them. These actions are very useful in Cincinnati. The city of Cincinnati is pretty proficient in bringing these actions. Franklin County in Columbus also has proficiency in bringing these actions. For policy reasons, the city of Cleveland has never brought one of these actions. They pursue criminal code violation instead, regardless of its effectiveness. And it's always been said as it's just a policy reason. But in every action that we bring, the city of Cleveland is a party to the case. They're named as a nominal party in case they have an interest, in case they have any fines or assessments against the property. The county and the county treasurer is also named in every action that we bring. and they're given the opportunity to participate. Whether or not, the city or the county participates, is up to them, but they're always named in the action and they're always given an opportunity to participate. So as I said, the first stage of the action is for the court to declare the property a public nuisance, and then they issue an injunction against the owner to abate the nuisance. So every owner of one of these properties is given the opportunity to do the things necessary, essentially to make this case go away, that if they make the repairs themselves, the case goes away. And now I say in this PowerPoint that, they're given 30 days. The statute provides that they can be given 30 days or more, depending on the court's discretion. So if we've had cases that we've brought where, the owner said, look, I have an intention of abating the nuisance myself. I'd like to fix the property up. I'd like to take care of this myself. And we've never really stood in the way of that. We just make sure that the court continues to monitor the progress so that the person brings it up to code, they pull permits, that they actually do the work. I mean, we've seen a lot of these cases where someone says, hey, I'd like to bring the property up to code and I want to, and then 6 months later, they still haven't done any work. And in those situations, after they've been given a reasonable amount of time and they've failed or they're unable to abate the nuisance themselves, then the court will appoint a receiver to take control of the property and do it for them. I think it's important for everybody to understand that these actions aren't filed against owner occupants. Under the statute, it can't be filed against an owner occupant. So, I want to dissuade people from thinking that, this is an attempt to go after, homeowners. These really are used for vacant and abandoned properties, that can't be addressed in typically any other way. Let's see. And like I said, the bank, I learned of a case in Rocky River the other day. The city of Rocky River brought a public nuisance action. And then I represent the county land bank as the receiver who took on the demolition of the property. And at court the other day, I learned that a case against PNC Bank, PNC Bank actually decided that, hey, we'd like to fix the property up and we're going to abate the nuisance. And so if an owner or an interested party has the ability or the desire and both to abate the nuisance, then once they fix the property up, once they address the code issues, then the case is resolved. The case only goes further to an appointment of a receiver if the owner or interested parties fail, refuse, or otherwise unable to abate the nuisance themselves. I just want to check a chat here, make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, unwillingness. No, I believe it was historically a policy decision of the mayor. At one point, the city had received funding to bring civil public nuisance actions, and they actually hired an attorney to do so. And 5 years after that attorney had been hired with the law department, they still hadn't brought a single civil action under the statute. The story was always just that the politics of the matter were that they'd prefer to pursue these actions criminally, and they didn't want to pursue them civilly. So I've always been given just a political response to that, but you'll have to ask people more politically savvy than me to get a better answer. I think it's important to know that, for instance, in the actions that Ohio City has brought, Ohio City has served as the receiver. It's important to know that in the role as the receiver, you're an agent of the court. You can only do those things and take actions that are pre-approved by the court. And before you become a receiver, you have to provide to the court a construction and financial plan demonstrating not only your capacity and ability to take on the construction and rehab, but also your financial ability to fund the rehab and or the demolition. We've used this for demolition before as well. But you have to demonstrate for the court that you have some experience in property management, that you have some experience in construction or managing construction and rehabs. And then you also have to demonstrate that you have the financial ability to fund the abatement. And that could be anything from a a $12,000 demolition to a $300,000 or more full rehabilitation of the property. But it's important to know that as the receiver isn't personally liable for anything except for misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance, essentially, not performing the duties of the receiver in a, kind of a gross, negligent way. And then it's important to know that all costs that are incurred must be first approved by the court. And then after you spend the cost and you've abated the nuisance, you present to the court all of your expenses and have those expenses approved by the court. It has to be consistent with the budget that you provided to the court, but it also has to be, kind of justified at the end of the day. And if the court approves the costs and expenses as they were incurred, and if the court finds that you've abated the nuisance, the court will then take those costs of the receiver and make them a super priority lien against the property. And that's really important because I think one of the most important parts of this statute is that it has a title clearing mechanism. And anybody that's familiar with the foreclosure crisis understands, toxic title and bank walkaways, and these properties that, through the foreclosure crisis, the owners vacated and left the property. The banks maybe brought a foreclosure, but then didn't follow that foreclosure all the way through to sheriff's sale. And so the property is just in this limbo, this legal limbo of the owner doesn't think they own it anymore, but the bank never really removed them of title. And so it has this toxic title element that no one could really buy the property on the open market due to these title issues, sometimes that are greater than the actual value of the property. And so when the receiver's lien gets placed on the property in first priority, it's then able to foreclose on that receiver's lien. And to the extent that at a sheriff's sale, the price for the property doesn't satisfy the receiver's lien, anything that isn't satisfied out of the proceeds of a sheriff's sale is essentially wiped out by operation of law. And so, those bank walkaway mortgages can be wiped out by operation of law. Excessive, liens, delinquent taxes, to the extent they aren't able to be satisfied out of proceeds of a sheriff's sale, those all can be cleared out by operation of law. And so at the end of the rehab and at the end of the sheriff's sale, what you have is a property that's returned, back to beneficial life. It's back to, a tax producing property. It's experienced an extensive increase in value. We've tracked some of the cases that we brought over time, and it's tremendous the amount of value that's put back into the neighborhood, and then increases the tax roll, and for someone that's actually paying taxes on the property. We've brought a handful of actions in Ohio City. I think I've probably brought maybe 35 actions in Detroit Shoreway. And I like to do a little postmortem on those and see, okay, where is this property 2 years later? Who owns it? Has it been transferred again? And what is the value of the property later? And so we've seen, quite a return of investment based on these actions. Let's see, that talks about wiping out all the other things. So why civil nuisance abatement? Well, it's more effective than criminal code enforcement. And the reason for that is if you can't get the party to show up, or if the party doesn't have the ability to fix the code violations, in criminal court, all you can do is fine them or send them to jail. But in civil court, you can take control of the property and you can actually fix it up, yourself. And so that's a very powerful opportunity there. So let's see, advantages. We've kind of talked about that. I think it's really important that, these are not a shotgun approach. These are a very targeted approach to nuisance abatement. The actions shouldn't be taken lightly and really should be very strategic. It's important to identify properties that are the worst of the worst, that you can't address any other way. And and then they're useful for that reason. If I would just say it that way, that it's important to, it's like an action of last resort against properties that you can't address any other way. Let's see. So strategic use, I mean, we've used them near schools, churches. If there was a large investment asset project that was going in and it had, condemned buildings across the street or nearby, we've used it, where, people said, boy, every time I take someone to let's say a rehab or a new project, they have to drive by this vacant and abandoned building across the street. And no matter what I try to do, I can't seem to deal with that property. The city can't address it, and try to find the owners and they can't address it. Well, then maybe this code section is good for that. So I think it should be strategic. We have used it on historic buildings, both the Sylvia building in Detroit Shoreway, as well as 3228, 3230 Lorraine is in the historic district, and it was used, we used nuisance abatement for that property as well. When you have infrastructure improvements, when you do a streetscape program, but then you have, vacant, abandoned, condemned buildings, adjacent to that, well, I think there's a really good case for targeted enforcement under those circumstances. If you waited for tax foreclosure, it could be 2 or 3 years. If you waited for the city's criminal code violation, that could be years as well. The average lifespan of one of these cases, and I say average, is 12 to 18 months. And really in about 6 months, you're in control of the property. If you can have it declared a nuisance and get a receiver appointed in 6 months, well, that is a really fast track to being able to address the conditions of a property, make sure that it's secured, make sure that the yard's cleaned up at a minimum. And then as you start planning maybe for a full rehabilitation of the property. So business improvement district, we've used it. There was a point where we used it in Slavic Village. There was a business owner that had a lot of vacant and abandoned condemned buildings around their business and around their business's parking lot, where their employees parked. And they went to Slavic Village and said, what do we do? How do we address these properties? And Slavic Village, in partnership with that local business, brought a series of actions to address the properties around that business, so that, when their employees were walking to work, they felt safer, so that the investment that business was making in the community was protected. And it was a nice kind of partnership there. Let's see. Oh, so there's the Sylvia building in Detroit Shoreway, if nobody recognized it by name. It was a 22-unit building. At the time we brought the action, there was only 3 tenants in the building out of 22. And as I said, the owner had died, but the property was owned in an LLC. And so no one could really control the property or do anything in the absence of a receivership. It says 4. There were 4 tenants, but then one moved out, because the heat got turned off. So there was only officially 3. And now it's 18 units of high quality, affordable housing. And it was, fully rehabbed to historic and National Register status. And then you might recognize that building too. So 3228 Lorraine, 3230 Lorraine. And here's a little note here that, it's important to understand that this action is for residential properties. You'll notice that 3228 Lorraine is a commercial property, but because it has residential units, it is identified as a residential property. So it can't be used for, commercial properties unless they have a residential component. But if they have some apartments in them, then this statute is eligible. And then again, I always express that this is not an action to be brought. It can't be brought against owner occupants. So, there's no chance of, people say, well, you bring this against a little old lady that, just can't afford to fix up her house. No, the statute cannot be used that way. It can't be used against an owner occupant, as a building does not include a building or structure where the owner occupies the structure and it contains 3 or fewer residential units. So I think the action is great for really problem properties, but also to support both commercial and residential development projects that are in the area. If people are making an investment in your community and you can support that investment by targeting some of the real problem properties that surround that, then I think that can be a win-win for everybody. Also, communities have found, partnering with third parties for the construction and the rehab. These actions were scarcely used by nonprofits because of the costs associated, right? If Slavic Village had to pay $15,000 to demolish every building and only receive a vacant lot in return, well, at the time, vacant lots in Slavic Village were $1. So, Slavic Village is spending $15,000 to receive a vacant lot that's worth $1. Now, obviously, as part of their mission is improving the conditions and removing blight, there's some benefit to that, but it could become very cost prohibitive. And so if you can find a partner that, is interested in supporting and expending their resources to help abate the nuisance, whether that's, demolition funds, whether that's, someone that wants to take on the rehab, that can be a way to kind of defray some of the out-of-pocket costs for abating the nuisance. And so there's been some good success stories along the way with that as well. And like I said, recently, even municipalities that have brought these actions, we brought one in South Euclid, and then the county land bank is serving as the receiver for that property. And so the county land bank is managing the rehab of the property. And then the city of Rocky River brought one, and the county land bank is serving as receiver, and that property has been demolished at the costs expended by the county land bank. Also, I think in Detroit Shoreway, the county land bank demolished a structure for us as well. So I think it's really important to partner with other players in the network that are familiar with the statute, familiar with the use of the statute, and understand the benefits. Let's see. So some problems or limitations. Not a whole lot of people know about this cause of action. Like I said, I bring these actions and have since about 2007, 2008. Zach Yermaniak, who is an employee of a Slavic Village Development Corporation, he was a law school fellow for me at Detroit Shoreway, and he's brought some of these actions on behalf of Slavic Village. That's about it. And so in about 2010, we put together a handbook, and we had held some CLEs for the surrounding communities, and tried to encourage other communities to take on these actions. And it just hasn't hit a lot of traction. I've brought these actions in Youngstown. I've brought them in University Heights and in Cleveland Heights as well. But mostly it's the city of Cleveland is where we bring these actions. And actually in the city of Cleveland, the Cleveland Municipal Housing Court has exclusive jurisdiction under the Ohio Revised Code to hear these actions. And so the Cleveland Municipal Housing Court has developed a full set of local rules for the administration of these actions, and it has really been a good partner at understanding the use of the statute, the benefit of the statute, and the ability to really hold people accountable in ways that the court was finding they couldn't do under their criminal code. And so at times, even the court itself would refer cases for the ability to bring public nuisance actions. There's also been owners of properties that have come to us, and I say us as the development corporations, and said, look, we have this property, we've got mortgages against it that we can't satisfy, we can't fix up this property, we're getting hit with code violations, we don't know what to do. Maybe we filed bankruptcy and we thought we lost this property in bankruptcy, but the bank never took it back. The bank foreclosed, but never finished the foreclosure. Help us. What do we do? And so we've brought these actions kind of at the request of the owners, and the owners have participated, and said, yeah, we admit our property is a nuisance and we are not able to do anything about it. And, they're not held financially liable if they can't abate the nuisance, or if they can't pay for the cost of rehab. That the judgment is against the property. The judgment is not personally used against them. And so we've had some friendly actions where people said, they threw their hands up and said, what can I do? And what we've been able to do in those situations is get everybody in front of the court and get the bank in front of the court, get the bank to release the mortgage, and get the owner to donate the property to a neighborhood development corporation in multiple actions. If it was a bank owner, or if it's an owner that just had no ability to abate the nuisance, and realized that they were financially, the property was not, it was a liability for them. They've actually donated the properties to the development corporations, and the cases have been resolved, very quickly because of that. Some other problems or limitations, a lot of neighborhood development corporations don't have the funds or capacity to serve as a receiver. And that's why, identifying third-party partners and parties that are willing and familiar to serve as receivers is important. And then it's extensive procedural requirements. The code section is very nuanced and it's unfamiliar to a lot of people. And so, I've inherited cases from other attorneys that have attempted to bring these actions and become frustrated with the process. And we're not able to litigate these cases in a cost-effective manner. And it's just because it's pretty novel. And then the timeline, the litigation timeline, like I said, it's 12 to 18 months, best case scenario, but that really depends on the length of time it takes to abate the nuisance. If you're demolishing the property, the case timeline can be shortened because, once you get appointed receiver, you can effectuate that demolition within like a month, but if you're doing a 3,000 square foot historic renovation, that could very well take over a year just for the rehabilitation, the permits and the planning, and things like that. And so the timeline in the case is really, really dependent on the timeline for the rehabilitation. The other limitation or problems with the timeline of the case is perfecting service of process. So unique in civil actions is you have to, every party that's named in the action and every party that has a legal interest, so a lien holder, if it's a deceased party, all the heirs of the deceased party, they have to be served with process. So served with a complaint and been made aware of the action. And sometimes that's very difficult. I've served defunct banks out of Louisiana. So banks that are LLCs that don't exist anymore out of Texas, and getting service on those, some of those entities are pretty time consuming and pretty tricky. And which is the reason that criminal code enforcement isn't effective against these properties. But in the worst case scenario, we're able to publish the complaint and get service of process that way. It's at an additional cost, and once you publish service, it has to be published for, I believe, 6 weeks. So it takes some additional time there. So when we have unknown heirs or unknown spouses or defunct entities, sometimes that can be a little bit of a headache for me. So with that, that's a general highlight of public nuisance actions. If we look at, so I'm still sharing my screen, we look at the property at 3228, 3230 Lorraine. I just put this together while we were waiting on the call, but some befores or afters. This property was quite a headache in the neighborhood for a very long time, with an owner that very unrealistically had a desire to fix it up, but it turned out that they had no ability to fix it up, and their goal was just to try to flip it to an investor and hopefully they would fix it up. But the property had federal tax liens on it. It was incredibly cost prohibitive for anybody to take on and fix up because of the condition of the title. But that property has been fully rehabbed. I believe it has a decent occupancy rate, and it's kind of gorgeous now compared to when Ben and I walked through it the first time. So the action is, like I said, very powerful, very useful, and we've had a great deal of success in Cleveland with it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and I'll open this up if anybody has any questions. Okay, a receiver, a fiduciary.
Yeah, it's Matt. Yeah, there's a good question in the chat, I think.
Okay, yeah. Not a fiduciary, but you are an agent of the court. So you're kind of like think of it like a court bailiff, if you will. You operate only under the authority that the court gives you. So the statute provides a list of things that you can be authorized to do. And when you become appointed receiver, you first present a plan to the court, and you say, Your Honor, this is what we'd like to do. Either we'd like to demolish the property, we'd like to rehab the property, and we're willing to spend the funds to do so. And we believe if we spend these funds, there's going to be some benefit to that. And if the court approves your plan, then you can act in accordance with that plan. So if you spend money that's in excess of the plan that's approved by the court, then those funds aren't approved, and you'll never get paid back for those funds. But no, there's no fiduciary duty, but you could be removed as receiver if you don't do what you're supposed to do. And then the court could appoint another receiver. People are probably more familiar with the appointment of a receiver in a commercial mortgage setting. Like, so if a shopping center goes into default, the mortgage company will appoint a receiver to collect rents, to make repairs, to essentially manage the property, so that it doesn't fall into disrepair. It's similar to that, but the problem with these is that there's no income. In those commercial receivership settings, the property is generating revenue that can fund the expenses of the receiver, that can fund the repairs, that can pay the receiver. And in these actions, when we receive these properties, they're not generating any revenue. They're essentially a financial liability, and the receiver has to come out of pocket to make any repairs, and any funds that the receiver spends, the receiver has to hope that at a sheriff's sale, it can either recoup those funds from the proceeds of the sheriff's sale, or that it will take title to the property as a result of the sheriff's sale, and then take ownership of the property. And then, once the property is fully rehabbed, you could rent it out and generate, income. But it would take a long time to pay off typically the cost of rehab. So let's see, or the courts.
I have a question for you real quick on that.
Yeah.
So when the receiver submits the plan to the court, the rehab plan, are those just rough estimates of what it might take to rehabilitate the property that the court approves?
They're a little bit better than rough estimates. We have to stick to it. So what we do is we scope it out, right? We do a scope of work, a very detailed scope of work, and say that we believe these are all the, like, say, mechanical systems that need repaired. And we believe that these are the costs associated with that. And it's based on, experience. We always walk through the property with contractors and essentially kind of put it out to bid and, get estimates and bids from contractors. It's always an informed scope of work, an informed bid. And because it really sets the benchmark for what we're going to do and what we're allowed to do and how we're allowed to spend money. And so it should be as accurate as possible. Now, what happens is when you go into one of these vacant and abandoned buildings, there's one on 3802 Clinton, it was piled full of trash. And so we went to the court and said, before we can put a scope of work together for this property, first, we need you to authorize just a certain amount of money so that we can clean this property out. so that we can pay for dumpsters and a crew to come in and clean this property out. And then we can take a look at it. So sometimes we ask the court, hey, give us 30 days to control this property. Let us secure it. Let us put a security system in it. Let us, not board it up, but maybe put a security door on it. And then let us go in there with contractors and let us figure out what a scope of work is and that it's feasible, right? Because if it's going to take $1 million to fix a property up, but after that, the property is only worth $100,000, the court isn't likely to approve that plan because they're like, it's not, financially feasible to spend $1 million to fix this up if it's only going to be worth 100,000. And so the court might say, is it more feasible to demolish this property? Now, we've had circumstances, for instance, in a historic district where we say, you know what, we did this in Famicos in Glenville. We said we believe that this property is important to the neighborhood character. And even though back then the Glenville market, the highest selling property in the Glenville market back then was, maybe 150 or 199. We said, look, court, we want to spend, in excess of $250,000 to rehab this property because we want to bring it back to its historic character, right? And we understand that even if we spend $250, that maybe we're not going to get our money back, but we're willing to own the property and we're willing to lease it out for a period of time, maybe until the market, comes up with the amount of cost we've spent on it. And that property on Ashbury, it really set the neighborhood. And, that property, they had to hold it for about a year and rent it out, but it really started to establish properties in Glenville that could be sold over $200,000. And, now, I don't know, it's 5 or 6 years later, they're seeing, property values over $300,000. And so, holding on to that property and making the investment that maybe only a nonprofit is willing to do, subsidizing the historic rehab of that, really, it turned an entire street and an entire neighborhood of these beautiful old homes that, you could buy for $5,000, right? But it was going to cost you $250,000 to fix up. So let's see, it gets confusing who's working for whom. Obviously, the seller is negligent. So who's working for whom? So if Ohio City serves as the receiver, Ohio City engages contractors, right? Or partners with contractors. And Ohio City's working for the court, and those contractors are working for Ohio City. We hear a lot of online chatter about impropriety. Well, I mean, my legal reputation's built on these actions. I'm the only guy that files them, really. So I feel very strongly about the ethics and the decision-making process that goes into each case we bring. And I have a great track record of every property we've brought. There's been success. Now, we've brought properties, brought actions against properties, and let's say someone said, hey, I'd like to fix this up. I don't live there. I haven't had the money, but my son would like to fix it up. We haven't been jerks in those situations. We've said, great, we'd like to see you fix it up. We want to make sure you pull your permits, and we keep the case open so that the court can monitor the rehab and make sure that the property is brought up to code. But these aren't situations of people losing their homes. These are situations of no one, most of these cases are not fought by the owner. The owner is not saying, please don't take my home. They don't live there, for one. These were investment properties or properties that, are not occupied or vacant and abandoned, and have typically sat that way for a period of years before we've brought the action. The process is definitely set up to avoid that. Everything happens in front of the court, and the court has given owners more time than maybe I thought was reasonable to attempt to fix it up. So the court is there to make sure that the process is above board. And, in those situations where someone says, oh, well, yeah, I know I've neglected it for 12 years, but now I really want to fix it up. The court says, okay, great. You know, you got 30 days, you got 60 days to not to finish, but to show me some progress, to show me that you have the financial capacity, that you're pulling permits, that you're able to fix this property up. What typically happens in those situations is 6 months after, you know, the person has shown no progress, they haven't pulled permits, they don't have any ability, you know, to bring the property back up to code. And a lot of times they join and say, look, I can't do it. You know, a receiver can be appointed. The process at the end of the rehab, we present to the court a notice of abatement, and we demonstrate for the court that we fully abated the public nuisance. Once the court approves that and get a declaration that the nuisance has been abated, then we present to the court our invoices, our expenses, our costs, and then we have to have those approved by the court. Once the receiver's expenses and costs are approved by the court, then we get a judgment. And the judgment is, I call it a receiver's lien. And the owner then is given an opportunity, if they can pay off the receiver's lien, the case goes away, they continue to have title to their property. You know, that could even be the bank. The bank could pay off the receiver's lien and take title to the property. If the owner or any interested party is not able to satisfy the costs of the receiver, then the receiver brings the property to sheriff's sale. Just like any other mortgage foreclosure, the property is offered at sheriff's sale. If the property, let's say the receiver has $100,000 receiver's lien, if the property, let's say, is appraised at $200,000, it's offered at a minimum bid of 2/3 of the appraised value. And the receiver typically will at least bid the value of its lien. So if it has a $100,000 receiver's lien, the receiver will typically at least bid that $100,000 to make sure it gets paid back its costs. If someone bids $101,000, then the receiver gets paid back. The $1 goes to proceeds in lien priority, so taxes first, and then mortgages, all the way down to the owner could receive proceeds if the sale proceeds are in excess of the receiver's lien, the taxes, mortgages, those kind of things. The owner could actually, if there's still an owner that could collect, could receive those proceeds. And then the property is owned by whoever buys it at sheriff's sale. I would say, you know, 99% of the time, that is the receiver. And that's because the receiver has the most knowledge of the property, the greatest familiarity with the property, and probably values the property more than anybody else does. And so you know, last, the receiver typically wants to make sure that if they're not paid back, that they get control of the property by bidding their lien. Same way a mortgage company would bid their lien at sale. The receiver can bid its lien at sale. Let's see the process at the end. More so land banks. Nothing. Oh yeah. You know, it's rare. Like I said, the county land bank has only served as receiver twice. Like I said, once and it's always been asked to. So both times the county land bank served as receiver, the municipality that brought the action then reached out and said, you know, county land bank, will you help us? Will you fund either the rehabilitation or the demolition of this property? If I had my way, the county land bank would bring more of these actions. Full disclosure, I represent the county land bank. That's not the reason why. I like them. I think they do good work and they can be held accountable. Process of abating a nuisance, a new danger, a nuisance is created. What can a neighbor do? Well, a neighbor could always plead into the cause of action. So you could try to plead in.
Yeah, Matthew. Excuse me, Dave. This is Dave Zamborski. I wrote that question in. How do you do that? How do you make
you hire an attorney, Dave? I can't give you independent legal advice.
Yeah.
But just like you'd plead into any other legal action. So you'd have to hire an attorney and you'd have to, you know, follow the legal process. It's a civil procedure question.
Okay.
But an attorney would know the answer to it. I mean, Dave, I would say for you, if it's a concern for Ohio City property, I would bring those concerns to the attention of Ohio City. I think you might even have my email. You could bring those to my attention. The last thing I want to do is for an action that I'm participating in and I'm the attorney for, or my client is the receiver for, I don't want bad things to happen at that property. You can't be at the property 24/7, but a good neighbor will notify someone that's in control of the property. And, back in the day, you could call Judge Pianca and you could tell him, and he would call me on my cell phone and tell me, hey, get out there and secure this property. Someone broke in. But you should, use your neighborhood CDC for what it's there for, is your way to have a voice. And so bring that to the attention of Ohio City for your neighboring property. Bring it to my attention. That it's the last thing what we would want is to be creating another nuisance. And so, and because it's a civil process, like I said, a neighbor within 500 feet, could, I would argue, could plead into that action. It's not without cost. And it's a complicated legal process. So I would always encourage anybody that's participating in a legal process to have an attorney. But I don't think these are contentious actions. We brought a pretty politically unfavorable action in Detroit Shoreway against a slum landlord. And we brought that action against all of the properties that he owned in the neighborhood. And everybody had opinions about it, right? I felt very strongly that what we were doing was right based on 10 years of trying to address these slum properties. And people were being murdered in properties. I think we had at least 4 murders in this group of 15 properties over a period of years. We had 16 fires over a period of years, very, very bad properties. And we tried the criminal code enforcement process. And after 2 years and him being fined and cited and drugged through the criminal housing court, the properties still were in that condition. And, we tried the city of Cleveland, and the city of Cleveland would send out an inspector and say, yeah, it's good enough. And it wasn't good enough for us or for the neighborhood. And so we brought a public nuisance action against them. And even when the city was participating in that action and said, yeah, we sent out an inspector, we didn't cite him, I would then show the prosecutor, here are the photos that I just took of the property. Here are holes in the floor. Here are, they're running water out of a garden hose from a property 2 doors down. The landlord some really bad things were going on. We said, look, a lot of criminal activity, a lot of drugs happening, there's human trafficking. And everybody thought we were crazy. We were going to court with these allegations of criminal activity. And the landlord said, no, I can't be responsible for what the tenants do. It's not, it's not me. It's just, I just got bad tenants. I just keep getting bad tenants. My tenants just keep setting my houses on fire. Well, you don't have insurance. And so when your house catches on fire, then it takes you 4 years, and then you don't pull permits to bring it up to code. And then you have people live there. And then when the people complain about the code conditions of the property that they're in, you just give them a month's free rent and then expect them to still live in squalor, And while we were bringing that action, it made the news because actually the county and 6 law enforcement organizations performed, unbeknownst to us, unrelated to our case, but consistent with everything we were saying. They raided 3 of the properties, and they found human trafficking. They found the police reports that came out of that were exactly what we had been complaining about for years, and what we were complaining about to the court to try to get these properties declared a nuisance. And it made bad press because I think Channel 5 said, oh, Detroit Shoreway boarded up this building and this nurse is, left homeless. Well, Detroit Shoreway didn't board up the building. The county prosecutor and the police departments boarded up the building, and that nurse was left homeless because her boyfriend and all of the people in the house were arrested with drugs and guns and for prostitution because the house had been under criminal investigation for like 6 months. But Detroit Shoreway caught some bad press from that. And, they blamed, oh, Detroit Shoreway did this. We didn't do it. We didn't know it happened. It happened over the weekend, unbeknownst to us. And, I come in on the weekend to figure out, I don't know how this property got boarded up. It got boarded up by the police raids. And so there's always an opinion, right? And there are differing opinions, and we can respect and appreciate other people's opinions. But ultimately, what I like about these cases is I don't decide, the court decides. I bring a client to court with a position, and I advocate for that position. And there are defendants, and they get to advocate for their position. And the city gets to participate if the city doesn't agree with the action. If the city doesn't agree that the property is a nuisance or is in code violation, the city has a voice. And then ultimately the court decides. And so I think that demonstrates, an inherent fairness. So there are opportunities to express your voice. You planted seeds of, there's some great, the values are soaring on Colgate. Thank you, Roger. Colgate, Dudley, Colgate, that was, people complained for years that Detroit Shoreway refused to address, that area of the neighborhood. And when we brought that action, it was a very strong response to what was going on in that neighborhood. And it was about it. The statements that were made by the defendant were, oh, Detroit Shoreway is trying to build, high-rise townhomes in our neighborhood. We weren't trying to build high-rise condos on Colgate or Dudley. We were trying to get rid of, conditions that people shouldn't have had to live in. Like I've gone in every single one of these properties and inspected them and taken photos, and the squalor, the amount of squalor that these tenants they're paying to live in, it's not fair. It's not fair to them, that a landlord can say, well, okay, maybe I won't charge you as much, but I'm not going to fix the sink or the water or the gas, basic living conditions, oh, I'm sorry your windows are nailed shut, but I'll take $50 off your rent. These aren't, like I said, these aren't cases of peeling paint. These are cases of squalor of, in the Detroit Shoreway case, it made news several times. And one of the times the city had issued a vacate order on families of these. We hadn't been appointed receiver yet. We were just complaining that these properties were nuisances at this point. And the city issued vacate orders against these families because of the squalor that they were living in, and not because these were messy, dirty families. These were not habitable living conditions, but they issued vacate orders, on Thanksgiving and right before Christmas. And so, these families, not by our action, like I said, it was a separate city action. They were displacing these families at, very difficult times. And when Detroit Shoreway was appointed receiver, we kept those tenants in place to the extent we could. I thought Detroit Shoreway did an admirable job of working with the tenants to relocate the tenants. Although we weren't legally obligated, I think they did a very good job being sensitive to the tenants' needs, and trying to keep tenants that they could keep in place. Some of the conditions, they had been fire damaged properties that when they were after the fire, they didn't fix charred or rotted floor joists or beams. They just put new carpet and new paint. And so when we got into some of the properties, we realized that they had serious structural problems, serious health hazards based on electricity, electrical problems. Some of the fires were intentional arsons. Some of them were due to faulty electrical. But when you have 15 properties and 16 of them have been caught on fire over a period of like 5 years, something's wrong. Either the landlord is not a responsible landlord, or something's wrong. And so they're powerful actions. People can have opinions about them. It's a public record. The cases are all public records. So, everybody's welcome to shine the light on them. I feel strongly about, the benefit that they've had. Let's see. Is there a 6 lease purchase home being built on
just a comment. Just
yeah.
saying like what is now possible there.
Yeah, we had neighbors.
Not previously
We had
possible.
neighbors
And it
thanking us. I mean, we had
makes it
neighbors
affordable.
that had decent properties that would come over and say, look, I've been scared to, to say anything or do anything, but thank you so much. Like, thank you for doing something about these properties. And so I felt very good about that case and what happened. But yeah, there was some negative press. There were people that had, you're displacing tenants. I would tell you that's there's facts and there's opinions. And I feel strongly about the facts with each case we've ever brought and the outcomes that have resulted from them. I'm not sure if I'm running out of time or how we're doing.
I think we're about out of time. Does anybody have any more questions at all? Or I think you've done a great job, Matt. We really appreciate you taking the time to help us educate everybody this morning about this stuff.
Yeah, I like I said, I think your organization, you brought a couple really good cases, and it's not you can't bring 1,000 of these cases.
Yeah.
But for the ones that you bring, there's an importance to it. Even 3802, that property, if not for Ohio City bringing that action, it would still be sitting there. It would still be sitting there without anybody being able to control the property. The people that could control the property, the heirs of the deceased owner, we tried to they said, we don't want anything to do with it. Stop calling. They're named in the action. They could probate the estate. They could take control of the property. They refused. And so thankfully, Ohio City is willing to step up, expend, limited resources. But I think if you make good strategic choices, I think those limited resources can go a really long way.
Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for signing on this morning. I'm going to stop recording now if I don't see any more questions. We're going to post this on our website. Thanks for that, Matt. Also, just in case people have questions, in the future, we can always refer them to this because it's nice, informative Q&A kind of style thing.
I field questions about this statute all the time, so I'm always happy to take questions or present on the topic.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, thanks everybody.